Welcome to the initiative HP Online Teaching Assistant by HP Education. Today, we'll talk about distance learning with G Suite for Education. This is today's content. First, let's see what Google products for education there are, and then we'll look at 5 tips we have for you for distance learning with G Suite for Education. So let's start with Google products for education that we have. Some of you may know them. If not, we'll tell you briefly here what they're about. We have Chromebooks, which are devices that allow schools to maintain a safe and controlled environment. You can create more than 200 policies of what to or what not to do with these devices. So they are a means through which children can learn. They are computers that start quickly and run both online and offline, and facilitate collaborative work between students and teachers. There is also Google Expeditions, a free app with virtual reality and augmented reality content so that children can learn about places where the school bus can't take them. Think of the 7 wonders of the world, museums, tours of the human body, etc. And G Suite for Education, which are all productivity applications at no cost. Later, we'll see how to include some of them in the tips we have for you. Now, let's move on to tips for distance learning. The first suggestion we have is this: virtual classes are not remote masterclasses. Let's get that out of our heads. We cannot pretend to do the same as we do in our face-to-face classes. Virtual classes are based on active learning, where the student is responsible for their learning. Also, keep in mind that we are neither omnipotent nor have the gift of ubiquity to be in each of the children's homes, seeing if they are actually fulfilling their duties or not. This type of teaching also implies that we should implement authentic evaluation techniques. There's an article by Professor Daniel Callison, Library Director of the Media School at the University of Indiana, where he speaks on the subject of authentic evaluation. He states that it is an evaluative process that includes multiple forms of student assessment that are not memoristic. So techniques such as performance assessment would be an assessment in which the student constructs a response orally or in writing. You can also use portfolios, which are a collection of students' work over some time, to show progress achieved towards the learning objectives. There would also be self-evaluation, which offers the student the opportunity to self-regulate their learning and be responsible for its progress and integrated assessment. An example could be that, with a science report, you're evaluating several areas. For example, the skill of language use, because it has to be composed, the selection and use of information, because students are probably going to have to do research, the ability to reason, critical thinking, and knowledge of the concept. That then allows you to evaluate different aspects of the student's learning. We can also review those synchronous and asynchronous activities and interactions with students based on learning objectives. So what can we use for this? Videos, infographics, written reports, presentations, comics, cartoons, the sky's the limit. Students react very well to these exercises. There is also the part about how we manage communication with them, before and after activities, to give them feedback. Another aspect to take into account is the controlled use of video conferencing. This is a wake-up call so we don't abuse the use of video calls. That is, the solution to virtual classes is not that now we're connected for 8 hours by video call like how we used to be in person at school. The last suggestion of this first tip is about fragmented content. That's to say, if I have a long lesson, why not divide it into mini lessons? If this were a class, what I would do is that each tip would be a mini lesson. I would leave you activities for each of them. I would disconnect while you worked on a task, then we would reconnect and give feedback about it. The second suggestion is, let's increase opportunities for engagement. That is, to engage students. So here I'll share 3 tips that go along with this advice. The first is, let's organize the work environment. What does this mean? Just like when you walk into a company or an educational institution and they tell you, here's our institutional email. That's what we should do with the students. Make that digital identity clear. Why? Because it's much easier that I'm receiving all the information from the school to a single email, and not that it's going to my personal email, where I handle my personal conversations with family, friends, and so on. The G Suite tools for education are free of charge for schools. Many of the tools can be used with normal Gmail accounts. The difference with educational accounts is that they are institutional accounts generated by the school, and they will have the @mycolegio.com. In other words, both teachers, administrators, and students will all be under the same domain. To access these accounts, You must fill out an online form with the school's general information so that Google can check that it is an educational institution, and then they would be registered. This is the link where you can go to do this process. To also organize the work environment, we have the Google Drive tool that allows you to store resources in one place, making them much easier to share, edit, and collaborate. Another way of organizing the work environment is to use Google Sites. If you don't have web design knowledge, this tool is perfect because you can create a site for your class, separate the sections by grades, subjects, or groups. It all depends on the purpose you have. For example, here on the left side, we see a history professor's website, where he embedded Google Slides to display important announcements, like activities of the next week, or announce an upcoming student assessment. It can also be used to keep parents informed of what their children are doing in class. I also embed the Google Classroom calendar so they are aware of the activities they have, whether they have exams, assignments, tasks, or if they have to connect. And they can also use Google Sites as a digital portfolio. Kids can use Sites to record their work by subject matter and include as many pages as needed. Another tool that serves to organize the work environment is Google Classroom. This is a virtual classroom for content management and asynchronous and synchronous communication with students. Here, you can focus all student-teacher communications. The idea is that they can foster active learning. Some teachers often ask themselves, when should I use Google Sites or Google Classroom? Which of the two? Well, they are not exclusive, i.e., both can complement each other. Imagine a bag where we put things that we can bring to the classroom. We could take a diary where we have the activities calendar, notebooks, books, billboards, messages to share with other classmates or the teacher, music, or videos for entertainment or academic exercises. Perhaps a place to store information and a tablet to take notes. Those might be the things that I could possibly put in this bag. So let's think of Google Sites as the bag and the rest of the things we mentioned because we manage them with the rest of the G Suite tools for education. So, in the virtual classroom where we carry the calendar, all your tasks could be in Google Classroom. Your notebooks, books, and notes, because you can manage them with Google Presentations, Google Docs, and so on, and use the other resources so to complement them. Another suggestion that is part of this second tip would be video conferencing with Meet. Education accounts can connect up to 250 people in one call. Live streams can have up to 100,000 users connected at a time. And you can record your meetings, then save them to Google Drive and share them. The idea of video conferencing with Meet is to be able to engage them in those synchronous sessions. For example, engage students in discussions on topics of learning to make them talk during the lessons in the chats. Take the topics of discussion in your lessons and allow the students to interact among themselves through the chat. Throw out a question and they write their opinion in the chat, or open the microphones and ask someone specific to participate. This includes the surprise factor, which is useful to ensure that they are with us and are not doing other things. If you have an acquaintance, no matter where you are, a specialist in any of the class topics, why not invite them to give an intervention in your class? That could be quite interesting. The idea is also to expand the scope with Meet. For example, with the use of subtitles, let's take advantage of this feature to give students with hearing disabilities the opportunity to participate in oral learning content during the lesson, or also for multi-bilingual students so they can be assisted by subtitles. There is also the feature of recording your lessons to provide access to students who could not log on in real time, or allow students to revisit the concepts developed during that session, as it may be that they did not understand everything seen. So after they have reviewed the video, and specific concepts are reinforced that may otherwise have been lost during transmission. These recordings are useful when there are inconveniences in connectivity. Sometimes a student fails to connect because the network failed. So let's give them access to the recordings of the lessons. In Meet, we can also schedule synchronous sessions. Doing so in advance can eliminate excuses for non-attendance or make sure that students are not taken by surprise. To define personalized tutoring with children or parents, you can also schedule all this with the Google Calendar. The third suggestion regarding this tip would be interactive documents. Let's take advantage of interactive documents. Avoid PDFs or normal document. We must be very creative in generating educational content that allows students to interact through links to other resources. For example, use Google Drawings to develop the creativity of students by producing their own drawings. You can also use it to make diagrams and incorporate them in your documents. Or use Google Slides and share them with students via Gmail, Drive, or Classroom. They can be created with hyperlinks to videos, recordings, games, and so on. Here is an example I found quite interesting: Hyperdocs. In this link, you can find more information on this type of document. But to get an idea, they basically help teachers transform their learning experiences through different activities. The activities are the ones mentioned below. That is, activate previous knowledge, then ask a question. And the kids can use Vocaroo, which is an application to make recordings. In this case, they can explain what they know about the topic and then insert it into Google Slides or into Google Docs. Engage students through a video, an infographic, a tutorial, a recording, a game, or whatever, so that they can get acquainted with the topic and explore it. Apply and create. Here you now give way for students to become protagonists in their learning process, so they create something from a task or a challenge you propose to them. Then they can do an experiment and mount it on a site, or create a graphic in Google Drawing or use Canva, among others. Sharing. The idea here is that they have a place where they can all share those creations and then receive feedback. Even the teacher can give feedback on each of the documents that the students are working on. And the last activity is that of reflection and evaluation. That is, to use tools like Google Forms or open a Meet space for them to present their creations and open a debate about them. So what we achieve is the extension of learning by adding all these types of resources. The third suggestion is to evaluate students' learning frequently. For that, we have Google Forms and questionnaires. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, you can motivate your students to read by creating a form where you ask them what book they are reading, the author's name, the number of pages. After that, you can publish it for all the kids, and there is healthy competition between them. You can create and rate quizzes with forms, evaluate knowledge before or after a lesson, give immediate feedback using self-assessment tests that tell them whether the answer is correct, or guide them if they have answered a question incorrectly. That means they have to be directed to a section where there is an explanation regarding what they failed to answer, so they can understand it better and determine the correct answer. We also have questions and answers in Google Slides. This tool seems quite powerful because the idea is to promote participation. So one way to captivate them is, in the presenter option that appears at the top, if I'm not wrong, a link appears where they can ask questions, which is what you see here. Ask a question at. So the kids copy this address on their phones or on their computers and they get this dialog box for them to ask questions. And if the teacher considers that one of those questions should be shared, then it's simply projected onto the screen in real time, and it displays the name of the student who asked it, and they can all discuss that question in particular. There is also feedback that can be done in Google Docs, so take advantage of all the possibilities that Google Docs affords you to give feedback in the document and allow collaboration between students on the same document. For example, you can enter a comment, and in mention of a specific student, using the symbol plus, you would put plus the student's name and ask him a question or make an observation. As teachers and also students, we can use the option of writing using voice recording to speed up the feedback process. This is quite nice because it speeds up the work of making comment. So you just talk, and what you say appears in writing almost immediately. We can also use suggestion mode in editing to make changes to the document, so the student can accept or reject it, or even write to you and ask you a question about it. You can also review the editing history of the document to monitor the progress and contribution of the students. So let's say several of them are working on the same project. The idea is to determine the ones who are actually contributing to it. So here we realize that Juanito has not been involved or that Maria has definitely done too much. This can even serve you for grading. And the last suggestion to frequently evaluate students' learning is to create discussions and assignments in Google Classroom. Here we can assign tasks, readings, videos, monitor who has completed their work, and grade it. You can even set up the evaluation rubrics for each activity so that when the kids consult their grades, they have better feedback of their performance. Here, we can take advantage of all the G Suite tools, namely Google Docs, Google Slides, Google Forms, and Jamboard, so students can demonstrate their mastery of a topic through collaborative or creative tasks in which they become creators of that content. Here, students are self-managing their learning and will have to submit evidence of that process. You can also engage students in discussions and evaluate their participation, taking advantage of the integration that Meet now has in Google Classrooms, where you can quickly call a synchronous session. For example, if they are working on something and you want to conclude or close the activity, you can call everyone, connect, do the closure or resolve certain concerns, and they can continue. The fourth suggestion is to think beyond the clock a little. Normally, a class lasts X time. The bell rings and we move on to the next subject. Now, the notion of time and space is different, so why not take advantage of that project-based learning methodology which is the global trend in education, to ask the kids to continue with a class project or resolve certain challenges after they finish that synchronous moment with you. We should also allow them to have that flexibility or empower them to define how and when to work on those projects. You define the deadline, that is, the work they have to deliver next week, but they define those spaces when to meet with their classmates to work on the specific project. Another possibility is to join several teachers and work on a class project. For example, set the objectives together and define deliverables that aim at different subjects. That is quite interesting and makes the activity more enriching. There is also the option to choose their adventure in classroom, so if you define the class activities for a week, they can decide which one to start. I don't know, maybe today I want to start with biology because I started working on my biology-related activities, and so on. That is, to let them be the ones who decide and not trace the path by which they should or shouldn't go. And finally, they can use gamification, which are game-specific dynamics to motivate students. For example, the escape room online, which is an entertainment experience in which you or several people solve a series of riddles to achieve the goal. We have some examples of escape room and we invite you to explore them. There is also the Huda math page that has math-related games for different grade levels, so it does not hurt to take a look and explore it. And our last suggestion is on the subject of distance learning without internet access. For cases where students cannot attend a real-time lesson, why not record the Meet session and then upload it to Drive so the student can download it and watch it when they have access to the internet? That way, you can leave videos or pre-recorded tutorials and upload them to Drive. All these kinds of things allow students to then access that content, even teach students how to enable Google Slides and Google Docs files to work on them offline. They can access those materials before leaving an active internet connection, and then, in offline mode, they can keep on working and advancing. And when they have the possibility of connection again, they upload it and send it to the teacher. Well, that will be all for today. Thank you for watching this video offered by HP Online Teaching Assistant, an initiative of HP Education.